My parents kept my older brother's bipolar disorder a secret from us, and my mom once told him that she could only trust him with our family's darkest secret. When I asked her why she never protected me from him, the truth I learned was far heavier than I could bear. I'm the middle child, with an older brother named Jack and a younger brother named Oscar. Jack and I are only 2 years apart, so I spent my early childhood looking up to him, though I never understood why he never wanted to play with me. Our mom struggled with hyperthyroidism, which made her extremely unpredictable. Some days, she would take me to the park and be my best friend in the whole world. Other times, she'd yell orders at me. If you don't clean this entire apartment, I'll give you something worse to cry about. She actually said that once when she caught me wiping my watering eyes caused by a dust allergy. The more my mom abused me, the harder I tried to build a relationship with Jack, until eventually, I gave up for good. On my 7th birthday, my dad surprised me with a bike. Because he was often busy working, the moments he spent teaching me meant everything. My eyes sparkled with the kind of joy only childhood can bring. The next day, I asked Jack if he wanted to try riding it. When I saw his face light up, I thought maybe I'd finally said the right thing. But instead, he took the bike and crashed it right into a wall. Jack was unharmed, but my bike was ruined. Jack came to me crying, but instead of comforting me or even giving me a pat on the back, he hit me and told me to shut up so mom and dad wouldn't hear. After that, I stopped trying to have any kind of relationship with him because it was too painful. A year later, Oscar was born. From early on, I decided I wanted him to have a better childhood than mine. Once he was old enough to understand words, I made sure to give him the praise our parents never did. At 4 years old, Oscar would burst into my room wearing Jack's clothes and put on random fashion shows. I clapped every time and told him how cool he looked, even though I was totally lying. You know that awkward phase when you always look a bit off? Well, Oscar's lasted until he was 16. It's honestly a miracle he wasn't bullied. But I don't think he noticed how the world saw him as a loser, because I always treated him like a star. Go me. That's when Oscar and Jack stopped sharing a room, and Oscar started sharing one with me instead. Jack had gone from being just a disobedient and difficult brother to a full-blown abusive addict. One night, Jack came home reeking of marijuana and started yelling at the top of his lungs through a megaphone. "Hey guys, how are you doing today? Just garbage?" His tactic was clear. Keep our parents awake with noise until exhaustion forced them to give him money for more drugs. It was truly awful. I always tried to protect Oscar from it, sometimes by putting earplugs in his ears or driving him to a friend's house. But no matter what, it was deeply distressing. One time, I came home to find mom covering a black eye Jack had given her with concealer. That was the moment I decided enough was enough. When dad came home, I confronted him in the dark hallway, telling him he needed to kick Jack out and get a restraining order because Jack was dangerous and frightening. Dad was kind, probably the kindest person in our family, but he was also passive. He was the type who might get robbed on the street and apologize for not having more money to give. So he simply nodded, but nothing changed for months. Then came the news that left me devastated for months. I had the chance to transfer to my dream college, halfway across the country. I remember waiting until Oscar was asleep to cry into my teddy bear, because going meant leaving him behind to face our family chaos alone. But then a new thought came. If I graduated and got a better job, I could afford to give both of us a better life, somewhere safe to call home. That morning, when I told Oscar, I expected him to look devastated and beg me to stay. Instead, his expression stayed completely neutral. "I'm really happy for you, Hannah," he said in a flat tone, just like always. I left home a few months later, feeling like I was abandoning him. Oscar and I stayed in touch, and months later, he told me Jack was in rehab and things were finally getting better. He was even in college, so we both had escaped the noise. When a friend said her sister was visiting Los Angeles, I told her I'd be going there too, and offered her my family's apartment. Although my parents had flaws, being unwelcoming to guests was not one of them. She was thankful and stayed in the room Oscar and I shared. But then one night, Jack came home after relapsing, drunk and high, and suddenly burst into a bedroom, assaulting my friend's sister. I found out 2 days later when my friend Melissa called me at 3 a.m., hysterical. I was half asleep and barely understood her at first. Then it hit me like a truck. Amber, her sister, had been assaulted by Jack in my childhood bedroom. I felt sick, running to the bathroom and vomiting until there was nothing left but horror and bile. This couldn't be happening. Not in my family's home. Not to someone I had promised would be safe there. I called Oscar immediately. He answered on the fourth ring, sounding groggy. I was trembling so badly I could barely hold the phone. Oscar confirmed everything. He had come home from a late study session to find the police at the apartment. Jack had been arrested and Amber was in the hospital. My parents were completely falling apart. I could hear the exhaustion in Oscar's voice, the familiar tone he had developed over years of dealing with Jack's chaos. Resigned, defeated, yet somehow still managing to function. I booked the first flight back to LA, spending my entire emergency fund on the ticket. During the entire 5-hour flight, I sat silently, staring at the seat in front of me. An older woman next to me kept asking if I was okay, but I couldn't even answer, just nodded and turned away. My mind replayed every interaction I'd ever had with Jack, desperately searching for the moment when I should have seen this coming, when I could have stopped it. Upon landing, I took an Uber directly to my parents' apartment. The driver attempted small talk, but I could barely manage one-word responses. The familiar streets of my old neighborhood now felt foreign, tainted by what had happened. The building looked exactly the same, but the atmosphere was completely different. Mom sat at the kitchen table, staring blankly at a cup of cold coffee. Dad paced back and forth in the living room, wearing a path into the carpet I used to play on as a child. Oscar sat in the corner, looking smaller than I remembered. I dropped my bag onto the floor, and the thud made them all look up. Mom immediately burst into tears, her face crumpling like delicate tissue paper. Dad froze mid-step, his eyes red-rimmed and distant. Oscar ran to me and hugged me so tightly that I could barely breathe. We stayed like that for what felt like an eternity. The familiar sense of home, Mom's lavender candles and Dad's aftershave, were now mingled with something sour and wrong. Later that night, after my parents had gone to bed, Oscar told me everything. Jack had cycled in and out of rehab 3 times since I left. The success story Oscar had told me before was only meant to keep me from worrying. My parents had been enabling Jack all along, giving him money and allowing him to stay in the apartment between rehab stints. Oscar's voice was flat, as he described how Jack would show up at 2 a.m., sometimes with strange friends, sometimes alone, but clearly high. How he'd raid the fridge, blast loud music, and threaten Oscar if he complained. I felt utterly stupid and naive. I had believed things were getting better, when in reality, they were only getting worse. And now, an innocent person was suffering because of it. Because of me. Because I had offered up our apartment without truly knowing what was happening. The guilt settled in my chest like a heavy stone, making it hard to breathe. I remembered Amber's smile when I told her she could stay in my old room, how relieved she looked to have a safe place during her visit to LA. The next morning, I went to see Melissa at her hotel. The lobby was full of bright lights and cheerful music, which felt almost obscene given the circumstances. I'd never seen my friend so broken. She couldn't even meet my eyes at first, just sat on the edge of the bed, hands folded in her lap, fingernails bitten down to the quick with tiny spots of blood on her cuticles. I didn't know what to say. What could I possibly say? Sorry my brother assaulted your sister? Sorry I told you our apartment was safe? The words felt empty, almost insulting in their simplicity. After what felt like hours of silence, Melissa finally spoke. She told me Amber was pressing charges, that there was DNA evidence, and it was an open and shut case. Jack was facing serious prison time. Part of me felt relieved. Another part was devastated. This was my brother, the same boy who used to build pillow forts with me before everything went wrong. The one who had cried when I left for college, clinging to my leg even as he pretended not to care. How had it come to this? I asked to see Amber, but Melissa said no. Amber didn't want to see anyone connected to our family. I understood. Still, I left a letter for her, apologizing, offering any help I could provide. I don't know if she ever read it. I sealed the letter with trembling hands, my tears smudging the ink. The next few days blurred together. Police statements, lawyer meetings, and family arguments. My parents insisted that Jack needed help, not prison. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. For the first time in my life, I screamed at them, my voice echoing off the walls of our tiny kitchen. I told them they were part of the problem, that they had enabled Jack for years, while I had tried to protect Oscar from the fallout. Mom covered her ears like a child. Dad slammed his fist on the counter so hard a mug fell and shattered, coffee spilling like blood across the linoleum. Oscar watched silently with those same stoic eyes. He had gotten so skilled at hiding his emotions that I couldn't read what he was thinking anymore. When I finally got him alone, I asked why he had lied to me about Jack getting better. He just shrugged and said, "You were happy at college. I didn't want to ruin that." His voice was so matter-of-fact, as if he were talking about the weather instead of years of deception. I broke down crying. My little brother had been protecting me when it should have been the other way around. I had failed him completely, failed Amber too, failed everyone by leaving and believing things would magically improve without me there to fight for change. Oscar awkwardly patted my back, clearly uncomfortable with my outburst. He had learned to shut down his feelings so completely that mine overwhelmed him. Jack's preliminary hearing was scheduled for the following week. I decided to stay in LA for the time being and took a leave of absence from school, sending vague emails to my professors about a family emergency. I moved back into the apartment temporarily, sleeping on the couch because I couldn't bear being in my old room, the room where it happened. Just looking at the door made me feel nauseous, imagining Amber's terror and Jack's violence. Every night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, watching car headlights cast moving shadows through the window, wondering how we had ended up here, how my brother went from the kid who broke my bike to someone capable of such brutality. I kept replaying all the warning signs I had seen but ignored or downplayed: the hitting, the yelling, the manipulation, the escalating behaviors that everyone simply accepted as Jack being Jack. The time he called Oscar's hamster an accident. The girlfriends who suddenly stopped coming around and never explained why. I visited Jack in jail once, just once. The facility was cold and sterile, smelling of disinfectant and despair. He looked smaller somehow, deflated. His usual swagger was gone, replaced by a shuffling gait as a guard led him to the visiting booth. When he saw me, he immediately started crying and begged for help. He claimed he didn't remember what happened that night, that he'd been blackout drunk and high. I just sat there staring through the glass, feeling nothing but emptiness. His tears seemed performative, his desperation calculated, or maybe I just couldn't let myself believe him anymore. That evening, when I returned to the apartment, I found my dad sitting alone in the dark. He looked like he'd aged 10 years in a week, new lines around his mouth and eyes, his hair grayer than before. I sat quietly beside him. After a while, he began talking about Jack as a little kid, how bright and funny he once was before everything went wrong, how he was reading at 4, solving puzzles, charming everyone he met. I listened, torn between anger and pity. The father I had resented for years suddenly seemed as much a victim as the rest of us. Dad finally admitted something I'd never heard before. Jack had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder at 14. My parents had kept it from Oscar and me, thinking they were protecting us. They had tried to get him help, but Jack refused to take his medication consistently. Then he started self-medicating with alcohol and drugs, and the situation spiraled out of control. Dad's voice cracked as he described taking Jack to different doctors, trying various medications, the brief moments of hope followed by crushing disappointment. I was furious that they'd hidden this from us. I told Dad we had a right to know, especially since we lived with Jack's unpredictable behavior. He simply nodded, tears streaming down his face, admitting they'd made many mistakes. The secrets only made everything worse. They created an atmosphere where we all pretended things were normal when they were anything but. The next day, I got a call from an unknown number. It was Amber. My heart nearly stopped. She wanted to meet, said she needed to talk to someone who understood Jack. I agreed immediately and suggested a coffee shop near her hotel. My hands trembled as I got ready, unsure of what to say. When I saw her, I almost didn't recognize her. Melissa's little sister had always been bubbly and outgoing with a big smile. The person sitting across from me looked hollow. Her eyes were dull with dark circles underneath like bruises. She fidgeted constantly, jumping at every loud noise in the cafe. I wanted to hug her but knew better than to try. Instead, I held my coffee mug tightly, trying to absorb its warmth. Amber asked me questions about Jack, his history, his problems, whether he'd ever hurt anyone before. I told her everything I knew, including what Dad had just revealed about the bipolar diagnosis. She listened intently, sometimes nodding, sometimes wiping tears away. Her fingers traced patterns on the condensation of her water glass, never still for a moment. Before we parted, Amber told me something that chilled me to the bone. Jack had somehow sent a message to her through another inmate who was being released. This inmate had approached her outside the courthouse and delivered Jack's threat. If she testified against him, he would find her once he got out. Her voice shook as she repeated the specific, graphic threats he made. I immediately called the detective handling the case. They promised to look into it and said Jack would lose visitation privileges. But the damage was already done. The fear had taken root in Amber, a new violation she would have to carry. When I returned to the apartment, I found Mom packing Jack's things into boxes, his ratty band t-shirts, his collection of lighters, the participation trophies he never cared about. She said his lawyer thought it would look better to the judge if Jack had a stable place to return to if he made bail. I lost it. I started throwing the boxes across the room, telling her Jack would never set foot in this apartment again, not while Oscar and I lived here. She was delusional if she thought he was coming home after what he'd done. Mom slapped me, hard. It was the first time she had ever hit me as an adult. The sound cracked through the room like a gunshot. We both stood frozen in shock, her handprint blooming red on my cheek. Then she collapsed to the floor, sobbing. I left her there and went to find Oscar. He was in our old room, sitting on his bed with headphones on, staring at the wall. I tapped Oscar's shoulder, and he jumped as if I'd shocked him. His eyes widened in panic until he recognized me. We went for a walk and ended up at a small park we used to visit as kids. We sat on the swings, not talking at first, the chains creaking rhythmically as we pushed back and forth. The playground looked smaller than I remembered, the paint peeling, the slide dented. Then Oscar finally opened up. He told me Jack had been threatening him for years. At first, it was little things, taking his stuff, forcing him to do Jack's chores. But it escalated to blackmail. Jack had caught Oscar smoking marijuana once and used it to coerce him into stealing money from our parents. He threatened to reveal Oscar's boyfriend if he didn't comply. I was stunned. I asked why he never told me. Oscar said he was ashamed and thought I'd be disappointed in him. I hugged him tightly and promised I would never be disappointed in him for being a victim of Jack's abuse. We made a pact right there on those swings. No more secrets between us, no more shielding each other from the truth. The rusty chains dug into my palms as I gripped them, sealing a promise I should have made years ago. The day before Jack's hearing, his lawyer called our parents with a plea deal offer, 5 years instead of 15. But Jack was refusing it, insisting he was innocent despite all the evidence, claiming Amber was lying. My parents were frantic, begging me to talk to him, to convince him to take the deal. Mom's eyes were wild and desperate. Dad kept running his hands through his hair until it stood up in gray tufts. At first, I refused. I told them Jack made his choices and had to face the consequences. But then I thought about Oscar, how this drawn-out process would affect him, and the toll a trial would take on Amber and the other victims. So I agreed to try, for Oscar's sake, not Jack's, and not for my parents, who still refused to see their part in this disaster. The jail was cold, smelling like industrial cleaner mixed with sweat and despair. Jack looked worse than before, twitchy and angry. His eyes darted around the room, barely settling on me. When I mentioned the plea deal, he exploded. He yelled that I was betraying him, that I never loved him, that I thought I was better than him. His spit hit the glass partition as he ranted, his face twisted with rage. I sat silently, letting him vent. When he finally ran out of steam, I leaned forward and told him I knew about the threats he'd made to Amber. His expression shifted instantly, from rage to a calculating look I'd seen 1,000 times before. The mask slipped, revealing the manipulator beneath. He denied the threats at first, then tried to justify them. Said he was scared, not thinking clearly, that he never meant to hurt her. He just wanted her to drop the charges. I stood to leave, and that's when he grabbed my arm through the small opening in the partition. I squeezed so hard I knew it would bruise. A guard rushed over and pulled him back. As they dragged him away, Jack shouted that if he was going down, he was taking everyone with him. He claimed he had dirt on all of us. His eyes were wild, almost feral, as he struggled against the guard's grip. I left shaking and called Oscar immediately to warn him. Jack had always been manipulative, but this was different. This was desperation. Desperate people do desperate things. I could still feel Jack's fingers digging into my arm, the 5 points of pain that would bloom into bruises by morning. That night, someone broke into Melissa's hotel room. Nothing was stolen, but Amber's clothes were shredded, scattered across the bed like confetti. The police said it was probably a random break-in, but we all knew better. Jack had connections, substance dealers, addicts, people who do favors for future payment. The hotel's security cameras mysteriously malfunctioned during the break-in. I insisted Melissa and Amber stay with my friend Tara, who had a security system and lived in a gated community. They agreed, too scared to argue. I spent the night making calls, warning everyone I could think of who might be targeted by Jack or his associates. My voice grew hoarse as I repeated the situation over and over, each call making the reality more real. The morning of the hearing, I woke to find our apartment door ajar. At first, nothing seemed missing. Then I noticed Oscar's laptop was gone, along with my old high school diary, the one where I had written about family secrets, Mom's abuse, Dad's neglect, Jack's escalating behavior. The leather-bound journal had been hidden in a shoebox at the back of my closet. Whoever took it knew exactly where to look. Oscar panicked, saying he had private photos on the laptop. Nothing illegal, just embarrassing stuff he didn't want anyone to see. Pictures with his boyfriend, private messages, journal entries about his sexuality that he wasn't ready to share with our parents. I tried to calm him, saying we'd figure it out. Inside, I was terrified. If Jack got hold of my diary, he could twist everything to make me look unreliable, to discredit me if I testified. We reported the break-in, but the police showed little interest. They took a report and left, barely looking around. We headed to the courthouse, both constantly checking our phones, worried about what might surface online. The morning traffic crawled, each red light an eternity of anxiety. The courthouse was packed. It turned out Amber wasn't Jack's first victim. 2 other women had come forward after his arrest, college girls who'd been too scared to report him before. They sat together in the front row, holding hands, their faces set with determination. The prosecutor appeared confident. Jack's lawyer looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. His tie crooked, briefcase overflowing with disorganized papers. Jack was brought in wearing an orange jumpsuit that hung loosely on his frame. He spotted me and Oscar in the gallery and actually smirked. I felt sick. This wasn't my brother anymore. This was someone else entirely. Someone dangerous, someone who took pleasure in causing pain. I gripped Oscar's hand tightly, needing something solid to hold onto, as the room seemed to tilt around me. The hearing itself was brief. Jack changed his plea to guilty at the last minute. The judge set the sentencing date for the following month. As they let Jack out, he glanced back at me and mouthed something I couldn't make out. Oscar squeezed my hand so hard it hurt. The clinking of the bailiff's keys echoed through the suddenly silent courtroom as Jack was escorted away. Outside the courthouse, a man I didn't recognize approached us. Tall and skinny, tattoos crawling up his neck, he looked like one of Jack's old dealer friends. Without saying a word, he handed me a note and walked off before I could respond. The note read, "Check your email. Jay says you have 24 hours to get him out or everything goes public." I checked my phone. There it was. Screenshots of my diary, Oscar's private photos, even a video I'd never seen before of Mom hitting me when I was about 10. Her face twisted with rage as she slapped me for spilling juice on the carpet. The email threatened to send everything to our extended family, employers, schools, everyone. Oscar and I sat in my car, trying to figure out what to do. We couldn't get Jack out. He'd pled guilty. Even if we could, we wouldn't. He belonged in prison. But the thought of our private pain being exposed made me physically sick. Oscar bit his nails nervously, a childhood habit resurfacing under stress. The car felt cramped and stifling despite the cool November air outside. I decided to reach out to the prosecutor, told her everything, and showed her the email. She was sympathetic but firm. This was witness intimidation, she said, and would only worsen Jack's situation. She advised us to ignore the threats. Easy for her to say, it wasn't her life at stake, her secrets being weaponized. She promised to add the blackmail attempt to Jack's charges, but it did little to ease our immediate fear. When we got home, my parents were waiting. Someone had already sent them the video of Mom hitting me. Dad was pale as a sheet. Mom was hysterical, alternating between apologizing and blaming me for saving the video to use against her. I tried to explain I hadn't saved it, that Jack must have been recording us for years, collecting ammunition. The living room felt like a pressure cooker, emotions threatening to explode. That night, Oscar and I made a decision. We wouldn't be blackmailed. We would control the narrative ourselves. I called my closest friends and told them everything. The abuse, the dysfunction, Jack's crimes. Oscar did the same with his friends. We posted private social media statements acknowledging our troubled upbringing, but affirming that we were breaking the cycle of abuse. My hands shook as I typed my post, but with each word I felt lighter. It was terrifying, exposing our family's darkest secrets, but also strangely liberating. No more pretending. No more covering for our parents. No more protecting Jack from consequences. No more lies. The truth sat between us like a third person, uncomfortable but necessary. The next day, the promised exposé dropped. Jack's friends had created a website with all our private information, but it fell flat. We'd already told our truth. The people who mattered to us already knew, and strangers on the internet didn't care. The site got some traffic, but most saw it for what it was, a desperate act of revenge by a guilty man. The prosecutor added witness intimidation and blackmail charges to Jack's case. His sentencing would likely be harsher now. My parents were furious with Oscar and me, accusing us of destroying the family by airing dirty laundry. I reminded them that Jack was the one who'd collected and distributed the evidence, that he was the one who'd assaulted 3 women, that he was the one who had been terrorizing us for years while they looked the other way. Dad simply walked out of the room. Mom threw a glass against the wall, the shards catching the light as they scattered across the floor. Mom moved out that night. She said she needed space, grabbed a suitcase, and went to stay with her sister in San Diego. Dad stayed but barely spoke to us. He moved through the apartment like a ghost, going to work, coming home, eating silently, retreating to his bedroom. Oscar and I didn't care. We had each other. And for the first time, the truth was out in the open. No more secrets festering in the dark. A week later, I got a call from Amber. She had seen our posts and wanted to thank us for standing up to Jack, for believing her, for not protecting him like so many families do. We met for coffee again, and this time she seemed stronger, still traumatized but determined to heal. Her hands were steady as she lifted her cup, her eyes clearer than before. I went back to my apartment to pack more of my things. I decided to take a semester off, stay in LA until Jack's sentencing, and make sure Oscar was okay. While going through my old room, I found something tucked behind the radiator, a small notebook I didn't recognize. Its cover was worn and the pages yellowed with age. It was Jack's journal from when he was 13. I sat on my old bed and read it all in one sitting. It was heartbreaking. He wrote about hearing voices, feeling like his brain was on fire, being scared all the time, and how he started drinking to quiet the noise in his head. His handwriting varied, sometimes neat and controlled, other times frantic scribbles tearing through the paper. One entry hit me hardest. He wrote about breaking my bike, saying he did it because he was jealous, because Dad never taught him to ride, because he wanted me to hurt the way he did. I cried for the little boy who wrote those words, for the brother I never really knew, and for the man he became, the lives he destroyed, including his own. I showed the journal to my dad. He broke down completely, saying they'd tried to get Jack help, but that the mental health system was a maze they couldn't navigate. They'd spent thousands on treatments that didn't work, and were afraid Jack would hurt himself if they pushed too hard. Dad's shoulders shook with sobs as he confessed their failures, their fear, and their misguided attempts to protect us all. I understood their fear better now, but it didn't excuse what they had allowed to happen. Their failure to protect Oscar and me, their enabling of Jack's worst behaviors, and their denial about how dangerous he'd become. The damage was done, and no amount of understanding could undo it. The day before Jack's sentencing, I visited him one last time. I brought the journal and asked if he remembered writing it. He seemed surprised I'd found it and said he thought he'd burned it years ago. For a moment, I saw a flash of the brother I used to know, vulnerable, human. His fingers traced the cover gently, as if greeting an old friend. I told Jack I was sorry that adults in his life had failed him, that he hadn't gotten the help he needed. But I also said I couldn't forgive what he'd done to Amber and the others, nor how he had terrorized Oscar. Actions have consequences, no matter what demons drive them. My voice was steady, even though my heart ached for what might have been. Jack listened and sighed. When I finished, he pushed the journal back across the table and told me to keep it. Maybe someday I'd understand him better. I took it, unsure if it was a peace offering or just another manipulation. The worn cover felt heavy in my hands, weighted with all our shared history. As I stood to leave, Jack asked if I'd be at the sentencing tomorrow. I told him I would, but I'd be sitting with Amber and the other victims. He nodded, as if he'd expected that answer. Then he said he had one more thing to tell me before I went. His eyes met mine, clear and focused for the first time in years. That's when Jack revealed his final, most devastating secret, one that would change everything I thought I knew about our family. "Dad isn't your real father," Jack said, his voice flat. "Mom had an affair with her boss. That's why Dad always worked so much. He couldn't stand looking at you." I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. The room started spinning. I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself. Jack just watched me, his expression unreadable. "You're lying," I managed to say, but even as the words left my mouth, memories surfaced. Dad's emotional distance, the way he'd sometimes look at me with a strange sadness, and how much closer he seemed to be with Jack and Oscar. Jack shrugged. "Ask Mom if you don't believe me. She told me when I was 15, said I needed to protect the family secret because I was the only one she trusted." He laughed, a hollow sound bouncing off the concrete walls. "Funny, right? Trusting me with anything." I left without another word. My legs felt like I was walking through water as I made my way to my car. I sat there for almost an hour, staring at nothing, trying to process what Jack had told me. Was it true? Or just one last attempt to hurt me? To throw our family into even more chaos? I called Oscar and told him to meet me at the diner near our apartment. I needed neutral ground for this conversation. When he arrived, he looked worried. I must have looked terrible. I ordered coffee but didn't drink it and told him what Jack had said. Oscar didn't seem surprised. That shocked me the most. He just nodded slowly, stirring his milkshake with a straw. "I kind of figured something like that," he finally said. "I found some old letters once, from someone named Robert to Mom. They were pretty intense." I felt betrayed all over again. "And you never told me?" "I wasn't sure," Oscar said defensively. "Then I forgot about it. It was years ago, Hannah. I was like 12. We sat in silence for a while. The diner buzzed around us, people laughing, eating, living normal lives. Must be nice. "We should ask Dad," I finally said. "Before the sentencing tomorrow, we deserve to know the truth." Oscar looked terrified but didn't argue. We paid and drove home in silence. Dad was watching TV when we got there, some old Western with the volume too low to hear. He looked up as we walked in, his eyes tired. "We need to talk," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "About Mom, about Robert, about who my real father is." Dad's face went pale. He fumbled for the remote and turned off the TV. For a moment, I thought he might deny it, but he sighed and seemed to shrink into the couch. "Jack told you," he said. It wasn't a question. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Dad rubbed his face with both hands. "I wanted to tell you so many times. Your mother wouldn't let me, said it would destroy you, destroy us all." "So it's true?" My voice cracked. Dad nodded. "Robert was her boss at the insurance company. The affair lasted about 6 months. When she got pregnant, she ended it and told me everything about her first period. I decided to stay to raise you as my own." "But you didn't," I said, anger rising. "You were barely there. You worked all the time. You let Mom treat me like garbage. I know, Dad whispered. I thought I could do it, be your father. But every time I looked at you, I saw him. I saw her betrayal. I'm so sorry, Hannah. I failed you completely. I wanted to scream, throw things, make him feel some fraction of the pain and confusion inside me. But looking at him, a broken old man with nothing but regrets, I just felt empty. Does Oscar know? I asked suddenly, worried. Is he? Oscar is mine, Dad said quickly. Biologically, I mean. By the time he came along, your mother and I had worked through some things. Oscar had been silent through all this, his face unreadable. I reached for his hand and he squeezed mine hard. What about Jack? I asked. Is he yours? Dad nodded. Jack is mine. He had problems from the beginning. The doctor said it was just colic at first, but he never stopped crying, never slept. As he got older, it only got worse. The mood swings, the anger. We took him to so many doctors, tried so many medications. That doesn't excuse how you let him treat us, Oscar said suddenly, his voice hard. You let him terrorize us for years. Dad started crying then, actually sobbing. I'd never seen him cry before, not when Grandma died, not when Jack was arrested, never. I know, he kept saying between sobs. I know. We left him there on the couch and went to my old room. We sat on the floor with our backs against the bed, just like we used to when things got too intense in the rest of the apartment. What do we do now? Oscar asked, sounding younger than his 20 years. I shook my head. I don't know. Go to the sentencing tomorrow. Try to process all this. Keep moving forward somehow. We stayed like that for hours, sometimes talking, sometimes silent. Around midnight, Oscar fell asleep with his head on my shoulder. I carefully moved him to the bed and covered him with a blanket. Then I went to the kitchen for some water. Dad was still on the couch, staring at the blank TV screen. He looked up when I entered. There's something else you should know, he said quietly. About Jack. About why your mother and I were so protective of him. I sat across from him, bracing myself. When Jack was 17, he tried to kill himself, Dad said barely above a whisper. Pills. We found him just in time. The doctor said it was our fault for not getting him proper treatment sooner, for trying to handle it ourselves. After that, we couldn't be strict with him. We were so afraid he'd try again. I thought about all the times Jack had manipulated them, used their fear to get what he wanted, money, freedom, and no consequences. He used that against you, I said. He knew exactly which buttons to push. Dad nodded miserably. We knew what he was doing. We just didn't know how to stop it without losing him completely. I felt a confusing mix of emotions, anger at my parents for their failures, pity for the impossible situation they'd found themselves in, sadness for Jack and the demons he'd been fighting his whole life. And beneath it all, a strange sense of relief. The truth was finally out. All of it. No more secrets. I'm going to bed, I said, suddenly exhausted. We have court in the morning. Dad nodded. Hannah, he called as I was leaving the room. I do love you. I've always loved you. I just didn't know how to show it properly. I didn't respond. Couldn't. I went to my room and curled up on the floor next to Oscar's bed, listening to his steady breathing until I finally fell asleep. The courthouse was packed the next morning. More victims had come forward overnight, 5 women in total now. Jack's crimes had made local news. Reporters crowded outside, cameras flashing, asking for statements as we pushed past them into the building. Amber and Melissa were already inside, sitting with the other victims. Amber looked up when I entered, her eyes questioning. I nodded slightly, letting her know I was there for her, not Jack. She gave me a small smile and turned back to the front. Jack was brought in looking even worse than before, pale, thin, with dark circles under his eyes. When he saw me, he smirked again, thinking his revelation had destroyed me. I stared back, my face neutral, refusing to give him the satisfaction. The sentencing was quick. The judge was harsh, calling Jack a predator who had shown no remorse. 15 years, no possibility of early parole. Jack's face didn't change as the sentence was read. He just stared straight ahead, as if none of it applied to him. As they led him out, he looked back at me one last time. I thought he might say something, one last attempt to hurt me, but he just looked lost. For a moment, I saw the little boy from the journal, the scared, hurting child. Then the guards led him through the door, and he was gone. Outside the courthouse, I approached Amber and asked if we could talk. We sat on a bench away from the crowd. I told her everything, about Jack's mental illness, my parents' failures, the family secrets that had just come to light. Not to excuse what Jack had done, but to give her the context she'd asked for. Thank you for telling me, she said when I finished. It doesn't change anything. Doesn't make it hurt less. but it helps to understand. I nodded. I know, I just wanted you to have the whole picture. What will you do now? She asked. I hadn't really thought about it. Go back to school, I guess. Try to finish my degree. Help Oscar get through this. Figure out who I am now that everything I thought I knew about myself has changed. Amber reached over and squeezed my hand briefly. For what it's worth, I think you're stronger than you realize. You and Oscar, both. I thanked her, feeling awkward but grateful. We exchanged numbers and promised to keep in touch. Not exactly friends, but connected by something neither of us had chosen. Oscar was waiting by the car. Can we get out of here? He asked, eyeing the reporter still lingering. We drove to the beach and sat on the sand, watching the waves. It was a clear day, the ocean stretching endlessly before us. Oscar skipped rocks while I just sat, letting the sun warm my face. I'm not going back to that apartment, Oscar said suddenly. I can't live there anymore, not with them, not after everything. Where will you go? I asked. He shrugged. Get a place with some friends, maybe. I've been saving from my campus job. I thought about my tiny studio apartment back at school, the scholarship that barely covered expenses, the part-time job that ate into my study time. What if we got a place together? I suggested. Not now, but after I graduate next year, somewhere halfway between your school and wherever I end up working. We could split the rent. Oscar's face lit up. You mean it? You'd want to live with me? Of course I would, I said, surprised by his reaction. You're the only family I've got that matters. He hugged me then, a real hug. Not the awkward pat on the back he usually gave. Same, he mumbled into my shoulder. We stayed at the beach until sunset, making plans. Practical things like budgets and locations, but also fun stuff. Movie nights, getting a dog maybe, having friends over for dinner, normal things that had never been normal for us. When we finally went back to the apartment, Mom was there. She'd driven up from San Diego after hearing about the sentencing on the news. She tried to hug me, but I stepped back. Her face crumpled, but I couldn't bring myself to comfort her. I know you hate me right now, she said softly. I don't blame you. I don't hate you, I said, surprised to find it was true. I just don't trust you, and I don't want to live in the past anymore. I told her about our plan, Oscar and me getting a place together after graduation. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. I understand, she whispered. I hope someday you can forgive me. I didn't answer that. Couldn't promise something I wasn't sure was possible. Instead, I went to my room and started packing. I had a flight back to school the next day, classes to catch up on, a life to rebuild. Oscar helped me carry my bags to the car in the morning. Mom and Dad stood awkwardly in the doorway, unsure what to say or do. I gave them each a stiff hug, more formal than affectionate. I'll call when I land, I told Oscar, hugging him tightly. And we'll talk every week, make plans, figure things out. He nodded, trying to look tough, but I could see he was holding back tears. Go be awesome, he said. I'll be fine here until you finish school. I believed him. Oscar was stronger than anyone gave him credit for, stronger than I'd been at his age. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. Oscar was still standing there, waving. Mom and Dad had gone back inside. The apartment building looked smaller somehow, less intimidating than it had when I was growing up. I turned on the radio and rolled down the windows, letting the cool morning air rush in. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe again. The future was uncertain, full of challenges I couldn't predict, but it was mine to shape, mine and Oscar's. Jack had tried to destroy us with his secrets. Instead, he'd set us free,